Hello everybody, I'm very excited today to talk to you and Ilya about contemporary music. My name is Corey Hamm and I'm a pianist and piano professor at UBC, University of British Columbia here in Vancouver. And I have had a fascinating career for me of playing a lot of contemporary music. I've been involved in premiering over 400 pieces by composers from all over the place. And that's gone hand in hand with my love of all traditional music, Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, everybody else. But I've always had a fascination for contemporary music. And today we're going to talk about just that. Well, so this is my UBC studio. Here we are at UBC School of Music, University of British Columbia School of Music, my studio, where I've been for since 2005, so 19 years. In fact, I can hardly believe. And it has all my little knickknacks and everything. Here's my photo of two of my gods, my pianistic gods, Richter and Gilels. An old poster when I had 10 of my students play a few concerts of all of the Scriabin sonatas, which was a big feat for them. And since that time, I've had one of my star students play all of the Scriabin sonatas in one concert by himself. This is kind of a cool thing. Happy birthday, Corey. All best wishes from Gary Grafman, who was my teacher. He was not my teacher, excuse me, but my teacher's teacher. There's Lydia Artemiou, who was my doctoral teacher, a fantastic teacher. I owe her so much. She was amazing. And she was one of the star students of Gary Grafman back in the day, and she kindly had him sign that for me. I have a lot of music, as you see. I used to be able to go immediately right to the piece. If somebody said, oh, this piece, and I could go right to it and pull it out. And I think I crossed the threshold a few years ago where now I have to think pretty hard to remember where some of these are. Although it's sort of organized. It's organized, but not as well as it should be, I think. But it is a lot. This is the whole lifetime's worth of accumulated music of all sorts. Oh, I have a theremin. So I'm sorry it's not plugged in. But about 10 years ago, I had a sabbatical. And I thought for the sabbatical, it would be fun to buy a theremin, which I did, and try to learn how to play it. And I worked on it. I did. I thought I had this dream of playing a concert where I played a bunch of solo piano because I'm a pianist, and maybe played one organ work because I used to be an organist, and maybe had one of my students, let's say, accompany me, and I would play the theremin. But I haven't done that. I haven't done that dream concert, but maybe it's in the future. I don't know. But I did try to learn how to play the theremin, and I got, kind of a little bit. Books, lots of books, lots of weird little things. This is an old puffer fish that I grew up with in the family basement that I got, and I thought I would put it here. This is an actual skull. It's a real skull of a coyote that one of my former students, Lillian Liu, great pianist and great photographer herself, gave me. And when she graduated, because she knew I liked weird things, and so does she, and so I appreciate that. This is kind of cool. I have, this is funny. This is a little hamster in a little ball, and I'm not sure if it still works. Let's see. Because my students, oh no, the battery's dead. But my students, of course, my name is Corey Hamm, and so my students call themselves hamsters, right? Or maybe I call them that, and they just put up with it. But they kindly gave me this a number of years ago, a little hamster. And that's very sweet. Sometimes I teach my students how to juggle. Don't make me juggle on camera. But because with contemporary music, there's many different layers and complicated rhythmic relationships that you're juggling at the same time. And so I think students should learn how to juggle. So I teach them just the very basics. I'm not a good juggler, but I do know how to juggle.
Is there Liberace?
Liberace, so that is piano shaped. Oops, it's okay. So that you can see the book. I grew up, my grandmother on my mother's side was a fan of Liberace, and I grew up with that book on her coffee table. And so when she passed, I inherited that, and I'm quite happy to display Liberace in my piano studio. These birds are actually from Robert Silverman, the great Robert Silverman, who had the studio before he retired. And when he retired, I came here, and he told me that, well, if you want the birds, you can have them. And so I said, sure. So these birds are actually Robert Silverman's, but he kindly let me have them in my studio. Masks, these are from Bali, because I had a project in Bali where 7 Canadian musicians from Vancouver musicians, Western classical musicians, went to Bali for 1 month to learn and work with Gamelan Sudamani, a great gamelan in Bali. And for 1 month we learned this new piece by Michael Tenzer, who's one of our ethnomusicology professors here, wonderful composer as well. So we had the great pleasure of working with Gamelan Sudamani and learning that great piece by Michael and playing it at the Indonesian Arts Festival there a long time ago. And while I was there, I bought some masks. I don't know. That's
and you
and me, just a pianist and piano teacher.
Yeah. Corey, thank you so much for inviting me to your UBC studio.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Well, I'm quite happy here at UBC in my studio. These birds, which I'm not sure if you can see on the camera, but maybe you will later on in the video, were here when I got the job here at UBC, and my predecessor, the great Robert Silverman, was retiring. And so he was on his way out with unpacking all his years of scores and memories. And I was coming in with my boxes of scores and memories, and he said, "Do you want the birds?" And I said, "Sure." And so they've been here for all my time here at UBC, which is now 18 years, and I think all of his time too as well. So
these birds might heard more music than all of us.
I think that's right.
Okay.
That's right. They're very experienced.
Well, that's really cozy. Yes, we will definitely go over all your books and all your fantastic stuff I see here. I probably need to explain what we are doing here and what's the main purpose of this discussion. We live in a new world. We are surrounded by new music, and I discovered that to my opinion, it's not enough information. People play contemporary music, people do that, but they don't speak much about this. And so today's video is dedicated to contemporary music, and I really like what you said before we started to film this. You said that you want to make video that your mom can watch and get some information about it, and that was exactly my intention too. I want our moms and all the moms to watch this and enjoy and maybe get some fresh ideas on what is contemporary music is and why people obsessed with this or they hate it. So let's just get started. Maybe it's wise to give a brief history overview, how music was changing over the time, when it all started, and how people were experimenting with this. Let's maybe start from Romantic era and see the differences between Romantic era and post-Romantic, and then modernism and so on.
Sure, yeah, well, I mean, that's a huge topic right there, but it's very important, of course. And well, I always think of it in Romantic. I mean, the usual people, the usual suspects are, Wagner and the pushing the boundaries of tonality, right? And so you had, Mendelssohn and Brahms were doing their thing and being progressive in their own ways. But we often single out Wagner as a guy who was, really pushing the limits, and also Mahler of tonality, experimenting with avoidance of tonic in tonality and trying to delay resolution of dissonances and pushing the boundaries of dissonances as well. Mahler was doing things like that as well, with double tonic complexes where you have two tonics competing for dominance, and then one wins at the end. And of course, eventually, it all comes to Schoenberg, right? Who then finally took that extra step. There's also Strauss, Richard Strauss, doing similar things. He went to his boundary, I think, in Salome, in his opera Salome, pushing to the limit for his limit. And then he also pulled back, and from that he said, okay, I did that, but never again for him. But Schoenberg took that extra step. He was originally writing beautiful, lush, romantic music, just like Mahler and Wagner and Strauss.
Yes.
Fantastic. Girl-Lieder is this gorgeous piece by Schoenberg, fantastic. And Verklärte Nacht, another fantastic, tonal, wonderful piece, beautiful piece. But he took that step and went eventually to 12-tone. And that was a big, important moment for Western classical music. What do they say? The emancipation of pitch. Suddenly, you didn't have to have a tonality, according to Schoenberg. But there's other people too, of course. We often, I think, we talk about Schoenberg as freeing pitch and tonality, and Igor Stravinsky freeing rhythm. This is way vastly oversimplified, of course, but Stravinsky, in Rite of Spring with this, of course, fantastic. And then Debussy is another one, right? So Debussy was freeing sounds, sort of, and color, and chords, harmonies as color, and non-functional harmony and parallelism, and of course also in Debussy's case, famous influence of Indonesian music and gamelan, and the incorporation of that into his music sometimes. And so I often think about the Schoenberg's gesture and freeing of harmony, and Stravinsky's freeing of rhythm, and Debussy's freeing of, I'm not sure how you put that, but the color of harmony, and harmony as just color and without needing to lead
modes.
to another thing. Pardon?
Modes.
Modes, absolutely. Whole tone and all these other type of explorations. Like I say, that's all oversimplified. But those are three kind of pathways that opened up Western classical music. And then suddenly, now and soon thereafter, sort of anything went. All of a sudden, you didn't have to be tonal, or you didn't have to have functional harmony, and your rhythms and your time signatures could change all the time, and maybe you wouldn't even have a time signature in some cases. Now we have even more exploration and cross influences from anything. Rock music and jazz is influencing people's symphonies, and people's symphonies are influencing rock music and jazz and world music, and I think it's fantastic. Actually, I think it's a wonderful time, and there's of course electronic music and mixed media music, multimedia music. Everything is influencing everything.
And then a guy called John Cage came and said, no music at all. And we got his 433.
Yeah, right. I think that's that piece is, of course, very, very important piece. And people make fun of that piece all the time because, nobody's playing anything. It's not even music. But the principle of that piece is that actually anything can be music. All the little sounds, nobody's maybe playing the piano at that moment, but there's little creaks in the chair and the car horn outside the hall,
Which becomes music.
Yeah, and breathing of your neighbor, maybe snoring of your neighbor, and everything is music. So I think that's actually a very profound, important piece, easily made fun of, but really it's critical. In fact, if I can tell a little tiny story, one time I performed that piece. Actually multiple times in a concert of, it was a concert of some solo piano, but also some chamber music. And then in the first half, we had actually 2 performances of 4 minutes and 33 seconds by Cage. The first half we played it, and that was, as you expect, just I was at the piano, did the right thing, and we recorded it, though. We recorded that performance of 4 minutes 33.3. And then we had intermission, second half with other chamber music and some solo pieces, and another performance of 4:33. But we played the recording that we had made earlier in the first half. And that was kind of cool because I think it drew people's attention. They might remember, oh yeah, that's the place where that guy dropped his keys by accident. Or that was that car horn or the ambulance that went by in the first half. And it comes back because it was recorded and we're playing that back. And so I think it sort of focused their attention even more on those noises or that music that happened in the first performance of it in the second time.
Is it correct to call this music, or it's more like actionism?
Yeah. It's a great question. Well, I don't usually go too deep into that, though I'm totally into contemporary music and all these things. And I think I absolutely believe for myself that any sound can be music, anything. Somebody could, belch, and that could be used as music. Not that it's music on its own, but that sound could be used by somebody else, or maybe it is music on its own. But I'm fine with accepting that any sound is potential in a musical setting. The structure of music, like what is music? Does music need? Because of course Cage went further and was talking about you don't need to have a structure, and it's the moment, and any sound can go, and that's beauty. And maybe a structure is not only necessary but undesirable sometimes, right? Okay, well, I'm prepared to accept all of that, I think.
Okay, if everything around is music, any sound is music, then how do we decide whether it's good or bad music? How to define?
Yeah, that's a question. I usually don't try, but I mean I do assess music all the time. As somebody who's into contemporary music a lot, I mean I love all music. I love every time period and all sorts of things. But when if I hear some new contemporary piece just written hot off the press, and I hear it, I will, I usually am I'm quite open-minded, but I will assess it. Do I like it? Did I like that? One of the greatest bits of advice given to me by one of my great piano teachers when I was a teenager. Her name was Thelma O'Neill, and I studied with her when I was 14 with her, and just when I started to get kind of good, if I could say that. And she was a former student way back in the day of Cortot, actually, and Kasadsu. And I'm ashamed to admit that at the time I didn't know who Cortot was. I should have, but I did not. And so I never asked Mrs. O'Neill for any stories about Cortot. And she passed away, of course. She was old. She was 70-something when I studied with her. And so she's long gone, sadly. But and I never did ask her any questions about Cortot. So anyways, that's my own stupidity. But I once went to a concert growing up in Edmonton, Alberta. We had symphony subscription, and I'm very thankful to my parents to provide that because they knew I was a young music enthusiast and I guess improving pianist. So I went to the symphony, and I saw John Browning, the great American pianist, John Browning, play the Barber Piano Concerto, Samuel Barber Piano Concerto. I saw it live with the Edmonton Symphony way back when I was, I think, also 14. And so here I am, currently a contemporary music lover and performer of many contemporary pieces, and I went to see Samuel Barber Piano Concerto, and I hated it. I thought it was noise. I'm embarrassed. I'm sort of embarrassed, but not really. I was just 14, but here's somebody who's now a lover of many types of contemporary music, from the most crazy to the most entertaining. And I did not like, in fact, I really did kind of hate the Barber Piano Concerto. And now, of course, we all know the Barber Piano Concerto is a wonderful neo-romantic piece that's in a key, keys, and has a beautiful slow movement in C-sharp minor that is gorgeous with beautiful melody, and it's a fantastic piece. I love it now. But at that time, I did not understand it at all. So I came to Mrs. O'Neill, my teacher, and I said, hey, I saw the Barber Piano Concerto last night or whatever, and I hated it. And she said, well, and this is the great advice that I pass on to the world, good advice for life, not just music. She said, well, if you hate something that you hear, listen to it 5 more times. That's what she told me. And I really respected and loved Mrs. O'Neill, and so whatever my piano teacher said stood. And so I took her advice, and I listened to recordings of the Barber Piano Concerto, and that helped, because I heard it more, and eventually I sort of got used to it. And I took her advice about that in general. She was actually not particularly a contemporary music aficionado or lover, but she was open. She was a great pianist and a great musician, and she was open, and she was a great teacher, and she knew exactly what to say to me to keep my mind open, to help me keep my mind open. And so I took her advice, and then I regularly went to the Edmonton Public Library on Saturdays. I took the bus down to the public library, and I would take out 30, that was the limit, LPs, records, right? Yeah, LPs, right? And I didn't know much, and so I would just look at album covers and see what looked cool, and bring those home and listen to them, and just explored and was pretty open. Eventually became open, thanks to Mrs. O'Neill's advice, and experienced a whole bunch of things. And along the way, there were pieces that spoke to me. I remember listening to Elliott Carter's Variation for Orchestra, this pretty, not contemporary now, but it was pretty contemporary there, pretty dissonant. And that spoke to me, actually. I'm not sure why, but it did. It was kind of cool, I thought. And another piece that has a path through my life was The People United Will Never Be Defeated by Frederick Rzewski. Yeah. I took Ursula Oppen's recording out just because it had a cool album cover. I didn't know anything about Rzewski or Ursula Oppen's or anything, really. I didn't know this. But I took it out and I listened to it, and I loved it. I thought that was a fantastic piece. And it had lots of of course the tune, the theme is very catchy, right? I could play more of that later, but very catchy, and I love the tune, and it went very far afield in the 36 variations that comprised that piece. And so some of it was quite avant-garde for me back then, but I got used to it. And
I'm very happy that you mentioned this piece, because you have recording that praised by all the critics, and I heard lots of fantastic reviews, and people love this recording. I have a question about the music. This particular theme that you play.
Oh yeah.
You play.
Well, I love that. I actually, when I've played that piece a lot in my now.
Yes, correct.
Like 80 something times, I think.
Don't you find it a tiny bit primitive?
Yes, but you know what? I think it's popular. I mean, I think that often popular music is primitive, and that's maybe why it's popular. It has, I mean, I'm not saying I don't think that means it's bad necessarily, though. It might be simple, but that's part of the reason that it can be understood quickly. And when we say something's catchy, I think sometimes I don't know that it's always that case, but it sometimes is the case that it's got a little earworm. We kind of understand it right away, and it's not too complicated, perhaps. So I would say that's true of the theme by Sergio Ortega, right, who's the original composer of the theme. Whenever I play it in public, one of the first, because I usually give a little talk about the piece before I play it to help the audience get into it. And I'll usually apologize to the audience because I say that probably all of you will be whistling and humming this tune for the next month. So I sort of apologize for that, because the tune is so catchy.
Is there any borderline between minimalism and primitivism? How do you feel this?
Well, I mean, now there's now there's post-minimalism. John Adams
Exactly.
is kind
Yes.
of, he incorporates
Correct.
some elements of minimal, the broken chords and the gradual progressions and things. And well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I agree with you. I love Steve Reich music, too, and I'm fascinated by any composer that is able to take simple materials and build anything successful. And then particularly amazing is when they can build something gigantic or something epic or something super profound. I guess it doesn't have to be gigantic, but that's kind of amazing and successful, I should say, like Beethoven did with Diabelli or Goldberg or Ligeti, I think, too. But the definition, primitivism and, well, I don't even know. I don't usually try to define. I think maybe that's one good thing about my accumulated experience now as a contemporary music lover. There's too many different types of music. I don't mean too many like there should be fewer, but rather there's so many, I should say that. So many different types of music that I don't need to define them necessarily. I don't feel I need to define them. I don't think it helps me necessarily. For me, I believe that it's possible to have very successful minimalistic music and very poor minimalistic music too. Actually, I can say something about this because I had an interesting experience as a student. I was a student participating, now I was 19 or 20 or something, and I went to the Summer Institute for Contemporary Performance Practice, where I now teach. But I was a student there, and with the fantastic artistic director and amazing pianist, Stephen Drury, who's incredible. And one of the concerts that was put on included a Feldman-esque piece, Morton Feldman, right? This very, another kind of minimalism, not with repeated patterns, but just, a little pointillistic note, and then a couple seconds and another note, and very sparse, maybe long lasting. And this was a piece not by Feldman, but by some other composer who composed in a style by Feldman. I like Feldman, I should say. I won't say the composer. And so I went to that, that's an example of one of the pointillistic pieces. And I went to this concert and I heard this piece, and it was about 16 minutes long. And oh my God, it was just so long, and I didn't really enjoy it, I'll admit. Okay. And I thought, it's just all these little blips and bloops every once in a while, and I didn't find it interesting. And I was already at that point as somebody who liked contemporary music. I was there to study contemporary music, but I didn't particularly enjoy that piece. I thought, that style's not for me. Okay, so then the second half comes of the same concert, and now there's a Feldman piece. Somebody's playing an actual piece by Morton Feldman, so the guy that invented that style. And and this piece I think was a bit longer, like 20 minutes long. Both were piano pieces, by the way. And so I thought, no, now I have to listen to another piece like this. But I listened to the Feldman, a piece I didn't know. I didn't know any of these pieces. And I loved it. I thought it was really successful. And that was a big revelation for me, because it was like, here's somebody who's writing in this sort of pointillistic style. And I didn't like it. I thought it was sort of unsuccessful. And then here's somebody else who's really a master of that style. And I did like it. And so that was strange. I didn't really know why. I think it was just the pitches, the timing, the pacing, the density, and the changing density of it was, Feldman was playing that the same way that the other guy was, but Feldman was good at it, and the other guy, I don't think.
I was going to ask, why don't think that you just were amazed by particular performance?
Well, that's possible. That is possible.
Yeah.
It was, absolutely, because we can hear, pieces that we might not otherwise like. You could hear Grand Galop Chromatique by Liszt and think, that's a stupid piece. And then hear Sifra play it. And then they think that's the greatest piece ever. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, maybe you wouldn't have that exact thought, but a great performance, totally engaging, and an incredible performance, successful.
Since we started to discuss this, what's the role of performer in contemporary music? How important is it?
I think it's this one thing I tend to tell my students, and I feel myself, is that there's no difference between contemporary music and Baroque or classical or any older music, any music. I think it's the same. And why do I say that? I mean, the music itself might sound very different. You know, Bach and Reich and Xenakis and whoever, and Ligeti. But the composers are just people, and they're just trying to reach their audience, I would say. I mean, they have their thoughts and their feelings, and they try and manifest this in music and sound. And hopefully, and most of the time, I mean, maybe there's some, occasion when this is not the case, but mostly they're trying to reach their public and trying to communicate how they feel and what they think and stuff.
I think people like it, because I remember a few weeks ago I was trying to get tickets on your concert at Ligeti. And we couldn't get any.
Oh yeah, right.
So we were late. We were going to buy it like maybe day before or like on the day of the concert. No way.
Yeah, well, that was sure. The Ligeti piano. I was playing Ligeti Piano Concerto, and there's a bunch of other great pieces and things that people, I think, would not have known. But the Ligeti Piano Concerto, not that that was the only reason that people went. Of course not. It was a great concert, but that is a masterpiece, and it is kind of a big thing in the world. These things occur. Some composers will write something, and it's like, Different Trains by Steve Reich is another piece, and that's a very profound, fantastic piece. And so people will go to hear that just because of the piece. It has a little bit of a cult following. I think the Ligeti Piano Concerto does too. It's nice. This piece by Gavin Bryars, Jesus' Blood Never Failed Me Yet, right? This piece. And so that has a cult following. And there's, every once in a while, there's the latest thing that the world is responding to, and it's nice to think that that's still happening, right? With contemporary music, and I think it's very difficult. I mean, I work with lots of composers, of course. Lots of people have written me pieces. I'm very thankful for that, and I've I've not just premiered, but played pieces that have already been premiered by other people, but I've had the opportunity to work with the composers, and that's why I think that they're just composers. They're just writing music, and I think if we approach Reich or Xenakis or Stockhausen or Ligeti or whoever, the latest composer, Dorothy Chang, one of my colleagues here, wonderful composer here at UBC, fantastic, who's written me some pieces too. We've just approached it the same that we would Beethoven or Bach, and just figure out what she's trying to communicate, how she's trying to do it, and still bring our hearts and our minds and our color, play in a colorful way, expressive way, and with shaping, and just do that the same as we do. There's no difference, I would say. The music might be different and have sort of maybe its own needs, but if you still, as a musician, just bring your usual approach, I think that will be good and make the composer happy, and people will respond to that too.
Do you remember our mom's still watching us? So we went a little bit too far. Let's go back and give definition to contemporary music, because I get this question a lot from my relatives, from my students as well. They're not sure. They say, what is contemporary music? Is it movie music? Is it contemporary music? Is it popular music? Is it contemporary music? So let's maybe talk about give a definition.
Right. It's a tricky one. I think about with my own musician friends who are also interested in contemporary music, and how we often, when we're speaking about contemporary music, what's the latest thing? It might be, for us at that moment, we're thinking of contemporary music being something like from this year, maybe from last week, very recent, right? Contemporary music just as far as how old it is. And maybe something from 5 years ago, maybe we're not thinking of that as contemporary. I know this is a slightly skewed definition, but for musicians, sometimes we think like that. And then something 30 years ago, well, that's not.
How do you call it then?
Well, I mean, it depends on what scale and what frame of reference. Like to a contemporary, a musician who's playing contemporary music, 30 years ago is quite old. So how do we call it? Well, 30 years ago we could call it 20th century music, right? Maybe 30 years. Soon enough, in 7 years, or 6 years, I mean, we won't be able to do that anymore.
Okay.
It'll be 21st century music.
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, at UBC, we require our piano students to place something that is contemporary in the at some point in one of their juries during their program, during their degree.
Yeah.
And so we define that, I think, as something written in the last 25 years. Define that. That hardly define. It doesn't define anything about the style, only about when it was composed. And I think to define contemporary music beyond that is super hard because there are so many different styles, and now all of these styles are influencing each other, like we spoke about a little bit earlier. And for our purposes at UBC, we don't need to define it beyond that. In fact, I think we're quite open. Somebody might play something minimalist. They might play a Philip Glass etude, let's say, or they might play a Ligeti etude, two completely different types of things.
Does UBC require to play tonal or atonal music?
No, we don't. We don't make any distinction about that.
I see.
One of the things that I do with my students, all of my students, I mean, I am a person, my job at UBC when I got the job description was for a pianist expert in post-1950 piano music. That was the job description of the job. So I got that job. The expectation, of course, was not that I would only teach that. And in fact, I don't. Mostly I teach Beethoven and Bach and Sweelinck and all the greats. I mean, all the traditional oeuvre. But they wanted somebody who had a particular expertise in that, and I'm thankful that they did, so I got the job. But we don't make any distinction like that for our requirements. With my own students, every year I make them do something contemporary. They always have to do something contemporary, along with their traditional. So it's not just once during their degree that I make them do that. They have to do that all the time. But once again, along with their Chopin and Brahms and everything else, which is super important, of course. But I don't even then make any I don't usually restrict them and say it has to be something atonal, or you have to be Schoenberg or Ligeti or something like that. However, if they are always doing, a Philip Glass etude and then the Carl Wein sonata, which I love, or John Adams, China Gates, or all of these wonderful pieces that I love, but if it's always in that kind of approachable, more approachable style, then I sometimes will say, okay, that's great, and it's no criticism of those pieces, but there are other styles. And I think it is useful, and I usually at some point will force my students to play something that is kind of thorny and craggy and maybe more atonal, or it doesn't necessarily have to be atonal, but more dissonant, more difficult. I want them to confront that at some point and figure out how to figure that out.
Here, they are here to get education, so they need to get the full scope of what's going on. So
that's right, exactly. Yeah. And now for my students, in fact, I've had this exact conversation with one of my former students, his fantastic former student, and who is wonderful and fantastic, and is opening up to all the many styles of music. But at the time we had this conversation, was maybe not as open to some of the craggier kinds of dissonant music, contemporary music.
Same.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And I said to my student, said, that's fine. Yeah, you can like what you like. Nobody can tell you what to like or not. But what happens if you have a student? I was speaking to my student, in the future student, who says, I love Boulez. I really want to play the second Boulez sonata. And you can't say no. Yeah, you can't say no. I forbid it.
But you don't have expertise.
Yeah, and so you should. I mean, well, that's an issue, right? Yeah. Maybe the student can't learn that with you, but that's a shame. And you don't necessarily have to like it, but I think you should have experienced, maybe not Boulez second sonata. It doesn't have to be that, but something like that. Something that is like that, so you can offer something. And I'm sure any good musician would be able to offer something, it can respond. And if they can't in certain styles of music, maybe they should. I don't know. I feel. I mean, there's lots of. I mean, I'm a contemporary music aficionado, but that sometimes people think that means that I love all contemporary music. It does not mean that. Absolutely not. Okay. But probably there's much more contemporary music that I don't like than there is that I like. But that's more to do with the quality, not so much for me, than the style. Okay. I love some Stockhausen, and I love some Schoenberg, and I love some Ligeti, and I love some Philip Glass, and I love some Reich, and I love like a whole bunch of stuff. But there are also things that I don't like, including by those composers.
This is the most interesting topic.
Yeah.
What you dislike?
Yes. Well, I think I don't like. I think I know the answer to this from myself, of course. I think I don't like it when there's formlessness. I like a narrative. I like a progression. I like something. I like not. It doesn't have to be a story, but some progression of some sort. Doesn't mean I'm fine with a type of music or music that has no melody. That some people say no, music has to have melody. I'm not one of those people. I don't think it has to have melody. Ligeti's Atmosphere, this orchestral piece, has no melody. It's just all about color and changes, and I love that piece. It's fantastic, and it has a progression, right? Does it go to a big bang at the end? No, it doesn't have like just a 2/3 of the way there's a cymbal crash. No, not that. That can be perfectly fine. But it's just a changing. And Ligeti, being such a great composer, has constructed this pathway through sound and through color in a very satisfying way to me, but not just me. I think that's a famous piece and sort of a masterpiece now. And so it doesn't have to have a melody. It doesn't even have to have harmonic progression in a traditional way. It could, but it doesn't have to have that for me. But as long as something is happening. So sometimes composers might have a good idea, a cool sound or a cool rhythm or a cool something, cool instrumentation. And then but that's not enough to build a piece. For me, if it doesn't have a good structure, and that structure, that word could mean many different things. It could be a very clear rhythmic progression like in Steve Reich piano phase or music for pieces of wood or something. Or it could be a very amorphous kind of progression like Atmosphere, for instance, or and anything in between, like across a whole spectrum.
Do you remember the first contemporary piece you ever performed?
The first contemporary piece, well, I mean, contemporary, of course, if we allow a definition that, is actually, I don't know exactly, to be honest, but like 70 years earlier, if we allow that and not the year of, then probably Cherepnin, bagatelles, 10 bagatelles, which I learned with Mrs. O'Neill, right? She gave them to me. I didn't know them.
Okay.
She said, here.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, and I loved them, and I played all 10, and that was another important piece for me at age 14 or 15 or something.
Did you face any difficulty in learning, in accessing the new language?
Well, by that point, I had been through already my Barber piano concerto thing, so that had already happened.
Okay.
And so, and I remember after the Barber piano concerto, because I was listening to other piano concertos, modern piano concertos, and so I remember listening to Prokofiev's third piano concerto. Shortly after, within a few months of listening to the Barber, and I liked that. So within a few months, I was now, improved, I opened up a bit, at least a bit. Yeah. Not that Prokofiev third is. I love Prokofiev third, but not that it's particularly, progressive. But for me at that time, it was. Of course, it's older than Barber, by far.
Right.
So probably Cherepnin was one, and I also love Prokofiev. I mean, I know that's not, of course I know that's not contemporary, but that was a path, and I learned Prokofiev episodes, opus 12. It wasn't until I got to be in university, that's when that started to open up. I didn't actually play that much contemporary music before then.
Yeah.
Even then it was a slow progression, and really most of that was playing my composer friends' pieces.
I see.
So so
Right.
I really went right to like now. They just wrote that piece, and then and they handed it to me and said, "Could you play this, next week?"
I've read on your bio that you've performed over 200 commissioned works.
Yeah, 400. 400.
400.
Yeah, some old.
Then you need to update
Yeah.
your website.
Yeah, my website is so out of date. I'm so sorry. It's actually over 400 now.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But yes, that's true. That's fun. I would encourage anybody, any young musicians or anybody, not just young.
But how long time it takes to learn one?
Well, I am kind of fast. I can learn pretty quickly.
Okay.
And I am a good sight reader because I worked really hard. I sight read voraciously when I was a kid. I sight read all the time. Not to improve my sight reading, but because I was interested in all kinds of music, not just contemporary either. Certainly not. And the Rachmaninov concertos and stuff like that, which were way too hard for me. I had no hope of playing those at that time, but I liked them. They sounded great, and it was fun to sort of hack through parts of them.
So do you think these abilities are must-have for contemporary music performer?
It helps, because I do think it helps. I don't think it's. I'd imagine it's not a must-have, but because of it depends on the scores too. You could play Philip Glass etudes, and it's not a must-have. But if it's Xenakis or Stockhausen or Ligeti.
Ligeti, yeah.
Yeah,
I heard you play everything by.
I've played everything by Ligeti with piano. Now,
Correct.
having just done the piano concerto, which I had never played before.
I see.
So last month or January, I played the piano concerto, and so that was it. Because I played the horn trio and all the etudes and the two piano pieces and everything with piano.
Yeah, I was dazzled by your performance by Basho Preludes.
Oh yeah.
And you have it recorded. And the question is, how many times your piano had to be tuned?
Yeah. Right, that's a good question. I mean, maybe you heard Boogie Demon,
Probably,
Let's
yes.
Go. That's one particularly crazy.
Intense piece.
Yeah, a very intense piece. And yeah, that can put it's got so many clusters and it's all over the place. And that can, you might have to tune the piano after that.
Yeah.
Most contemporary music is not that crazy. Like the Bashaw, that particular one is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's true. And if you're playing, there are other pieces like that too. He wrote another piece, Howard Bashaw, that I've played because I played a lot of his music. He was a friend of mine. He's written some pieces for me too. And those preludes he wrote for me. But Hosu is another great piece by Howard Bashaw, not written for me, but it's a wonderful piece, and it has many clusters. And that's a good example, maybe speaking about what we were talking about, any sound can be music, because it has lots of, clusters. I won't say undifferentiated, because he's kind of specific in formation, but really with a fantastic dramatic design, and it's an amazing piece, I think.
I will ask you a question that I received from one of my little students. They asked me, because I am very picky on raw notes in classical repertoire, and they said once that she said once that she wants to play something contemporary, and she said, because I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter, they never would count raw notes in contemporary music. What do you think about this?
Well, I think that sometimes that's true.
Really?
Sometimes. I have played. Sometimes it's true, but oftentimes it's not. Sometimes a composer will write a bunch of notes, and they'll like even Bashaw. Actually, in that piece you were just talking about, or I think the piece you're referring to,
Yeah.
Boogie Demon, Let's Go.
Yeah.
there's a moment in that piece. He writes everything out. All the notes are written out. Everything. No improv. But in one place, a big section, he writes quasi-faceto. Quasi-facetos, meaning like he doesn't exactly care if you play all these right notes, but it has to have that energy and that kind of density and texture.
Yeah, more like
but you don't
idea.
Have to the idea of that. Mm-hmm. He did write out every single note.
Yeah.
But he didn't care. And I've had, in that case. And so I've had that, composers do that. Well, actually, one of my pet peeves as a performer of contemporary music is when a composer will write out all this very specific stuff, these complicated rhythms and all these notes, and it might be, really hard, super hard to play. And then you practice it diligently, and then you meet with the composer for the first time, having prepared their piece, and then they say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. You could just play whatever there." It's like, what? I just spent hours and hours and weeks and weeks getting exactly what you wrote. So I hate it when a composer does that, and now I'm old, and I'll tell them, like, if you want it to be faked and stuff, fine. I have no problem with that. I can do that, but don't tell me to do a bunch of specific things. Give me some examples, and maybe give me a pitch set to play with, and sort of maybe even a graphic score, which can be good, that has...
Like one Gubaidulina uses,
right?
For instance, right?
Exactly, that's right. It shows increasing, decreasing density, highs and lows, and all these sort of more basic requirements, and still highly structured, really, but maybe not in the pitch. And then I'm fine. That's great, but don't make me spend all this time. Besides, when you're trying to do all these specific pitches in the particular way, if it's super difficult, it can become very tense and tight.
Definitely,
and not wild at all. That's why Howard Bashaw wrote.
It's fantastic performance. I have to admit, I mean, maybe I would not listen to this before going to sleep, but it's definitely fantastic performance, and
thank you.
very, very impressive musically. I was quite surprised. I'm not very often, I have to admit, that I'm very tonal, musician. I even Stravinsky, after middle of his life, for me, I can't access the same pleasure, I would say. Yes, and I had a friend. He once told me that he loves and hates two things. I said, "Okay, what do you love?" He said, "Early Schoenberg." And what do you hate? The late, his late work. It's like two different persons.
Yes, I understand that. Sure.
Yeah. What do you like? What do you like to listen? I mean, when you just I don't know, having wine with your friends, or you're alone, or you think, or on your car, what do you listen? Do you listen to contemporary music, or you listen to classical music?
I listen to. I think I listen to a lot of different types of music, including jazz and but. I do. I mean, it's a good question, a very good question, because I listen to I listen to a lot of piano music sometimes, but I also listen to lots of orchestral music, maybe more orchestral music than I do piano music, but it's a lot of both. But for contemporary music, I do listen to a lot of contemporary music, but part of that is because I'm still exploring contemporary music, so I'm still looking. I mean, I buy, I buy so much music. Every year my tax man is pulling his hair out because I spend so much money on music, on sheet music and books and stuff. But I've done that my whole life. And I would say that's, I love that. And also that's part of my job, I think, is to be a little bit of a filter. I mean, as a performer, right? So I might buy 100 scores. I mean, I definitely buy way more than that, but I might buy 100 scores in a year, buy them, and I never heard them because there's no recording of them because they're new, and then I'll play through them if if there isn't a recording, but it's often the case. And then, 95 of those are just put on the shelf, and because they're not that good, in my opinion. It's a bit presumptuous of me to say that, but at this point, I think I'm okay. But I'm thankful because 5 of them are like, well, these are great. And then maybe if they're piano pieces, then maybe those are the 5 pieces that I'll play in the next year or a couple of years or something like that. Or maybe they're for my student. Maybe I'll say, here's a great piece, you should play this. For myself or for my students, But I had to go through 100 pieces to find 5 or 1 or something like that. But I don't mind. So I listen to a lot of contemporary music with that in mind, from that point. But I also have favorites and things that I love and that I come back to. And so I listen to those, I haven't listened to this for the last 6 months, and I listen to it again, and I usually love it again. And, but it could also be it doesn't have to be contemporary, it could be anything, but I do that with contemporary too. Sometimes people are like, I only like Schoenberg, or I only like atonal stuff, and Philip Glass, or Steve Reich even, or John Adams, or any or Barber, neo-romanticism of Savion Barber. They'll be like against that, and but I'm not like that. I like Barber a lot. But I like a whole bunch of different things. I don't have a problem with multiple styles. And I would say that in my commissioning over the decades, commissioning other composers to write pieces for me or for my ensemble, whether it's a 2-piano, 2-percussion group, or the Arhun piano group, or New BC, one thing we cultivate by myself or with my colleagues is different styles. Like, I don't want to have just thorny music, and I don't want to just have more popular, accessible music. I want to have a whole bunch of different composers of a bunch of different styles writing for us and see what comes out. I find that very interesting.
It explains probably your one of your recent projects, because when I saw the ad on the internet, you, Corey Hamm, and Louis Bisset, 2 the most remarkable contemporary musicians in Canada, you all of a sudden played Rachmaninov symphonic dances, and I think Babajanyan as well.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Armenian Rhapsody.
I was like, what? Why don't you play? I don't know, even music by Philip Glass for 2 pianos, or finally, if you prefer tonal music, Kapustin.
Yeah.
He has lots of funny and devilishly difficult pianistically.
Sure.
His 2 percussion, his concerto for 2 pianos and 2 percussion is my dream to play. I'm piano duo pianist, but I'm.
Did I tell you my story about that?
No.
Oh, I'll
please.
tell you the story when you're. I'm sorry, I don't mean to
I'm
interrupt.
done. I'm done. I just.
Well, I have a good story. You're going to like this story.
Please go ahead.
But first, my love for Rachmaninov has never changed, has never abated or anything. I've always loved Rachmaninov, and have played lots of his piano music and some concertos, and played the second suite of quite a few times back in the day. Not lately though, but always loved that. And I'd never played the symphonic dances, as I think I told you. And so I had this opportunity to play with great Louis Bisset, and we were premiering Petro Shujunyan's new piece for 2 piano, based on Group of 7 paintings.
Correct.
And that was a real pleasure. I'd never played with Louis before, and we hit it off, and that was just a great experience. And it was wonderful to play Petros' new piece, which is multimedia. It also has some visuals related to the paintings of the Group of 7 that he was inspired by to write these pieces. And so we thought, well, what else should we play with that big piece? Because that's a 40-minute piece.
Correct.
And we both sort of like, well, we made our lists, but both of us had lists that included some Rachmaninov, and we thought, well, let's do that. Neither of us had played that piece. And
I see.
So, and I love that piece. I always loved it. So that's how we chose. It's easy to choose Rachmaninov.
Yeah.
And then Babajanyan, because of the Armenian connection with Shujunyan. So we thought, he suggested that, and I played some Babajanyan before, but never that
Yeah,
piano piece.
it's a fantastic piece. I
Yeah,
have
it's
to,
very beautiful
Yeah, very
piece.
very nice.
Nice.
Very nice.
And so that's how we chose. It was really, and it was a true pleasure to play that whole concert. I'm sure we'll play that here in Vancouver at some point, but we haven't figured that out yet. Kapustin's story.
Yes.
So, Kapustin, way back, I first encountered the music of Kapustin in his second piano sonata, in a recording with Nikolai Petrov.
Correct.
Right?
In 90s.
Yeah. And so I bought that CD and never heard Kapustin before, but I loved that piece. And so I bought the music and sort of always dreamed of playing it, but never did. I have now played it lots of times, but then I didn't play it. But then I had around that time I had my 2 piano, 2 percussion ensemble. And so I was getting more and more exposure to Kapustin, mostly thanks to Marc-André Hamelin, who was recording it and playing it and stuff. And not many people at that time were playing it besides him, at least not here. Now everybody's playing it, which is fantastic. And I think we owe a lot of debt to him, to at least here, to open that up. So I thought that, Kapustin, it would be great if Mr. Kapustin would write a piece for 2 pianos and 2 percussion. And so I should, I'm just a student, with my group that we're commissioning, so maybe I could ask him. And so I contacted, I knew Marc-André Hamelin at that point, and we were sort of friends. And at that time, we just knew acquaintances. But I told him about this because we were having drinks or something. And he said, you should contact Jan Hoare, this man in London who's friends with Kapustin, and the contact that Kapustin has when Hamelin plays in London. So I said, okay. So I contacted Jan, and he said, okay, I'll ask Mr. Kapustin about this 2 piano, 2 percussion group idea, whether he would write a piece. I said, okay, great. And so a few months go by, and eventually I find out that, actually Mr. Kapustin said no. He doesn't think so. I said, okay, too bad. That's, that, and I didn't think anything of it. And then about 2 years later, I was now closer friends with Marc-André, and he said, hey, are you the guy that commissioned Kapustin to write 2 pianos and 2 percussion piece? I said, what? I asked through Jan if he would do this, and but he said no. And so I never thought anything more of it. He said, and then Mark told me, well, he did it. He wrote the piece.
He wrote the piece.
And I was both overjoyed and terrified at the same time. Overjoyed because, of course, a new piece for 2 pianos, 2 percussion by Kapustin, but terrified because I didn't have a grant to pay for that or anything. That was all just a little question 2 years ago. And he said no, so that was it. It was over. And so now he wrote the pieces. He's going to say, well, now I need my money to pay. But he didn't. But he wrote this piece. That's the concertino for 2 pianos and 2 percussion. And so that was cool. And it's not, he didn't even know who I was. So I'm not saying that Mr. Kapustin wrote that piece for me. But he did write that piece, and it did come from that. Not that he wrote it for me, or not me, but my group. But it did. That was part of the story. Was that part? But so it's kind of cool.
Have you ever played this one?
Yes, we played it. We played it.
It's a difficult piece.
Yeah, difficult. It's a difficult piece, but cool.
Very cool. Kapustin is one of the coolest, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
composers.
You asked me about who do I love, and I love some Xenakis, and I love some Stockhausen, but I also love Kapustin, and I love Rachmaninov, and I love Prokofiev, and I love so I don't see there's any problem with that or difficulty for me at least. Yeah. But I love Kapustin, and I've played quite a lot of Kapustin.
Do you play his concerti as well?
No, I would love to. Yes. Have you played a concerto?
No, we're focusing now mainly on the 2 piano music.
Yeah.
We play one of his latest works that never been published.
Oh wow!
So hopefully we could.
Fantastic.
We could do the project soon.
Yeah.
With this music.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually remarkable. I think it's one of his best ever written piece for 2 pianos. After the after the concertino you mentioned.
Yeah, right.
For percussions.
Yeah.
I love this piece a lot.
Yeah, me too. I think it's
Yes.
great, and it was such a shock that he did actually write the thing.
Yeah, I will ask the next question. It's not related to what we just discussed, but my mom
Yeah.
asked me once. She told me, I went for a concert. She goes for concerts a lot in Montreal,
Fantastic.
basically twice a week at least, sometimes more often. And she said, I saw performers put something inside the piano.
Right.
Can you tell me more? I kind of replied, yeah, this is called prepared pianos, and you doing some, but I was not able to demonstrate. Maybe you can
Yeah.
reveal more details.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, you know this, but it might be of interest that the prepared piano with Cage, right? Cage
Yeah.
was the first, and he was commissioned to write a piece, and he was writing a lot of percussion ensemble pieces,
Yes.
like the constructions. He wrote these really great and normal percussion works that are really wonderful and traditional in many respects. And so I can't remember who commissioned him, but it was a dance company. I don't think it was Merce Cunningham, though. I might be wrong, I forget. But some dance company wanted him to write something, and he said, I'll write a percussion ensemble piece. But the stage was too small. They couldn't have all the percussion instruments, which would take up too much of the space, for dancers. And so eventually, through his own ingenuity and maybe happenstance, he came up with, put a tinfoil plate or something in the piano, and it made a kind of cool rattle. And he thought, maybe I can just have a piano. I don't need 4 percussionists. I can just have one piano on one side. There's enough room for the dancers. Sorry. Then he went to town and tried to experimented, putting rubber and bolts, nuts and bolts and things in between strings, and to get these different sounds. And of course, he famously wrote lots of prepared piano pieces subsequently, and among them sonatas and interludes for solo piano, but prepared piano. Putting these bolts and different sizes of bolts and different, plastic or rubber or metal and different types of metal. Actually, different types of metal will make a different sound. He figured all this out, and at the beginning of sonatas and interludes, he writes precisely that you should be this distance, and between these strings, and the size of the bolt should be this long, and it should be this far up along the string, and all very specific. The thing about it, though, and that's wonderful. The thing about it, though, when you actually play sonatas and interludes, which I have done, by myself and also with my students, if you just change the thing, whatever you're putting, the bolt or something, by like a millimeter, it can have a completely different sound. So even the specificity of Cage is not enough really to be precise about the sound that he's striving for. So we have to rely on some people that worked with Cage.
I see.
Them saying, we wanted a more mellow sound here, and this type of thing.
The question is, do the concert organizers let you use their pianos?
No, usually no. I played a concert I've played a few concerts that required some preparation of the piano. Actually, not sonatas. I have played sonatas and interludes. Here at UBC, we have a special piano that we can do whatever we want with. It's an old, not very good piano, but it still works. It's a grand piano, of course, and so we can do whatever we want. And they were going to sell that piano. I said, "Can we please keep it, and then I can just do whatever I want with it and my students?" And they said, "Okay," which is great. I'm thankful for. And so some concert halls will maybe have a piano that you can do stuff like this on, that's in the basement or something.
Correct.
And so I remember playing a concert in China that had some preparations, and they said for the rest of your program you have to play you can play this piano, but for the prepared piano piece you have to use this one. And that was fine. I was appreciative that they had another piano. It was an option. Okay. That was in Shanghai, I think.
Yeah.
And But usually they just say, no, you can't do anything. No. And I understand their concern. And there is a right way and a wrong way to prepare a piano. And actually, my little display here,
Yes.
this book, I have no affiliation, The Well-Prepared Piano by Richard Bunger, is great. It's the book for preparing piano. I mean, it's written in I forget, let me just look it up. 1981, published in 1981, and it tells you everything you need to know about the preparations up to that point in time, because there's more now, I suppose, about how to do them. So if you're a pianist who wants to prepare a piano and have somebody who says they will allow you to prepare the piano, then that's the book to read. And it's out of print, to my knowledge. I'm pretty sure it's out of print, but some libraries have it.
They have it.
You know, so, but it's a good book. And it tells you how to do that. So now, should I?
Yeah.
Let's cut.
Let's cut. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's cut.
Are we ready?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So years ago, I played a piece by Johnny Greenwood, who is one of the musicians in Radiohead, the famous rock band. And he's quite a cool composer, and he wrote a piece called 88. And in it, you have to wear fingerless gloves, because some of your playing is going to be with your fingers, and you couldn't wear full gloves because that wouldn't fit and it wouldn't work. But some of it is, most of this piece is super fast, or builds to super fast glisses, palm glisses. So not just a gliss with like your thumb like we normally do, but rather this kind of sound, this type of thing. Very, very fast, and without these you'd hurt yourself or get caught on the keys, but with the frictionless or somewhat frictionless gloves, you can go very, do this type of thing and get this kind of special sound. Also Stockhausen, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen wrote a piece, Klavierstück 10, the 10th piece by Stockhausen, which is full of also these type of cluster glissandos and many other things, coupled with normal piano playing. And there's a famous recording of that by Frederick Rzewski, actually, a great composer and fantastic pianist. Incredible recording. So, okay, so there's these fingerless gloves for that purpose only, but we could do many other things. You can get, I don't have bolts to put in my piano today, which my piano technician here would be very thankful for, but I have some, these are just piano tuner wedges that they use, and if you put them in, place them, you can get different, you know, a sort of a stopped sound, right? Percussive sound. If I take pencils, here are two pencils, and if I put them gently between the strings, there's three strings here, so I'm putting them between both of them. Just a second, let's see. And then play that. It's going to be this kind of cool stopped sound, a little bit. Oops. Oh, sorry. I'll do that again. I'll put them closer, and maybe I would have to place them a little bit better, but so there's some pitch, but also a stop kind of gong-like sound. Here's a special thing that came with a score. It's called a spammet, and it's felt, put on wood, or felt, or not foam, I should say, not felt, but foam, and it will stop the sound of these strings. So, right, and so you can get that kind of sound. It came with a score by Mark Mellitz, great American composer, and the name of that piece was Spam. That's why this is called the Spammet. And we can also do other things. By the way, you can see I'm holding down the pedal, the damper pedal, so all the strings are going to resonate. I could scrape a bass string. Right, you get this kind of cool sound. I could also stop those strings. I'm silently depressing these keys. so that those dampers come off. Then I'll put my fingers on those two strings to stop them, and then I'll strike these, and you'll get this cool gong-like sound. Right? And then you can scrape. George Crumb will ask you to strum with your fingertip, that is the flesh of the finger, kind of a gentle sound. Or with the nail, which will be, of course, a louder sound. You can you can play a string. Here's just a key ring kind of a thing. You could take any metal, like a paper clip or something, and play a key. So it will vibrate. George Crumb does that in some of his music. You can take a piece of paper and put it on the strings, and if hopefully it's flat enough, and then you could play, right? You get this kind of a harpsichord-like sound. If you put something on top of that's a little bit more weighty, you can hold it to that, and you'll get maybe a better sound. Now it's stop kind of sound. Of course, you have to make sure it covers the right strings. So that's another sound. And then George Crumb also came up with this, which is you silently depress some keys. Here, I'm putting these down silently, and then I strum all the strings that include those strings for those keys, and those will ring. Right? Now I put the pedal down, and now it's holding that resonance, and then I move silently to another set of strings. Right? Right? And so you can do that, and George Crumb does that in some of his pieces as well. There are many, many other things that people have come up with. I mean, here's something. This is just a mallet, right? For a marimba mallet with a string head, and you just. It's kind of a cool sound. Do it with just your palm, whether it's, I'll take off my fingerless gloves, you can do you can get some really eerie kind of sounds out of the piano. There's many, many more. This is a bow. So this is a bow, and it's just, you can see it was at some point an actual bow for a violin. There's the string, and it's been tied together. Now this is a little bit tricky, but if I put this around a string, and then if I get the right speed, I can get, and if you find, you can also find harmonics. It's tricky to do, actually. You have to be careful when you do this, of course. Do not try this at home, maybe. But harmonics, just quickly, you can find harmonics on the piano. Of course, if I play this note, there it is. But if I stop the string and if I find the harmonic, right, and if I move my finger along, right, so you can, and so there'll be many pieces by George Crumb and others that use those kind of sounds where you might be playing sometimes on the keyboard and then in the piano, and you have to find these harmonics quickly. And so what we often do, they used to recommend putting some chalk on the string, but usually they'd say don't put chalk anymore, and I don't do that. But if you put a little string, tie a little string around the string at the point where you should put your finger, actually just ahead of it, so you put your finger right up next to the string in preparation for the concert, that will help you quickly go to those places for harmonics.
Right.
There's another composer, Henry Cowell, who wrote Aeolian Harp, which is another sort of strummed piece. He did this in the beginning of the 20th, or near the beginning of the 20th century, and it's a strummed piece, very beautiful piece. Strummed meaning you will silently, you know, those are the wrong chords. That's not the piece exactly. I forget what they are. But it's kind of a simple little piece, but you play it by strumming. It can be quite a fun piece, actually, to give to a student, to a young student even, because it's not hard.
Yes.
And it's a new thing, and it sounds cool, and they could totally do it. And that could be a perfect way to introduce a student to contemporary music by doing something like that.
We usually give a piece by Slonimsky.
Oh yeah.
The forks.
Oh yeah.
Forks, or you can put the hairbrush.
Yeah,
the
right.
Wooden one. Yeah, on the list of paper. Yeah.
That's a great thing.
Yeah. Can you please tell us what these numbers and I see?
Oh
so
yeah.
you have labeled.
Yes, that's right. Another contemporary pianist necessity are stickers. And you can see I put some stickers here. Some piece that I was playing, I don't remember which piece it was right now, but some time ago, because in some pieces you have to quickly go, right? You have to stop things, you know, and it might be very quick. You have to do that and go to here, and you need to find them very quickly. So you label them. And George Crumb, in his scores, he suggests two possibilities to label. He says one is to just label the notes that you have to play, but because he has many different moments when you have to stop or do something fancy with the strings, after a while, you know, if everything's labeled, it's not that helpful to find because you don't have time to read them sometimes. So he says you can either do that and maybe color code them for movements. You might use red for the first movement, yellow for the second, like this. That's what I have done sometimes. Or he suggests that you could just label all of the black keys, the dampers, that is, for the black keys, and then you can immediately see the layout of the keyboard easily, just like we can with the black and white alternation. And I have done that a couple of times too. That can be useful as well. Mm-hmm. One thing to make just a note, because there's a whole, there are correct, safe, healthy ways to do these things to your piano, and there's also bad ways to do it. If you're putting stickers on the dampers, of course you must do it very gently, because the relationship of the damper and the way it hits the string is very precarious and very sensitive. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to put a sticker on a damper, you must make sure that that damper is raised off of the string, as it is here. And then you would just very gently tap the sticker on there. And if you're removing it, you must make sure you remove it with the damper off of the string. Otherwise, you could compress the felt, and then it will hit the string in an improper way, and it might ring or it might have a buzz or something like that. So you have to do these things very carefully, and these are laid out well, or many of these things are laid out there.
Yes.
One last thing, with the sostenuto pedal, George Crumb uses, the sostenuto pedal is a pedal that you can program which keys you'd like to ring. So if I silently put these down, I don't have to do it silently, but there, I put, well, let's do something more interesting. Let's do this. So I'm going to silently play those keys. Then I'll put the sostenuto pedal down. So now it's holding the dampers off the strings. If you look up here, you can see that those dampers are now raised off those strings, so they will resonate. And then if I do a gliss of all the keys, only those notes will ring. right? And so they're ringing. And that's kind of a cool thing. Another thing that George Crumb uses is he will ask the pianist to silently depress as many black and white notes as they can to keep as many dampers off the strings as they can, and then put the sostenuto pedal down. So now those dampers are held above the string. And then if I play up here, because of sympathetic vibrations, those notes will also ring, and you'll get a kind of cool echo effect. Right? Right. Right. And those are, it's kind of a creepy sound. One time, long ago, I had I think a 9-year-old student, and I was showing her all these, or many contemporary inside the piano or extended techniques, these and quite a few more, and I wrote them all down in her book, and sort of labeled, you strike the string or stop the string or pluck a string or whatever, strum a string. And then I said, okay, you should write a little piece using these sounds. Just you don't even have to write notes down necessarily or whatever you need to do, but just sort of a story. And she did. And I remember she called it Shark Attack. That was the name of her piece. And she entered it into a little kids composer competition and won, I remember that, just some local competition. But given that we're talking about contemporary pieces and how I got into it, well, here are other ways. That's not the way I got into it, but that was a way I was hopefully helping her get into it a little bit. And fun for kids, too. Okay.
Thank you so much. You forgot to mention one.
Oh, sorry, please.
One thing. Do you scream at the piano sometimes?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. So yes, you can do that. Oops. So if you go, ah, woo, you can get it to resonate with the echo. And so I've played pieces where the clarinetist, let's say, will have to come over to the piano.
Correct.
And play directly into it to get it to ring like that. My little funny story is not exactly that, but one time for Ligeti wrote an opera called Le Grand Macabre, a big opera, really great piece and amazing piece. And one day, for one of the performances of that piece, I think pretty early in its run after its composition, the soprano was sick and couldn't sing this very coloratura aria. She just couldn't do it. I'm not sure if she couldn't do the whole piece and they had to get somebody else, but whatever, they couldn't do that aria because it was the crazy thing. And so they said, well, the trumpeter, I think it was Håkan Hardenberger, the famous trumpeter, was in town or something. I don't know the whole story. But he said, well, I could play that aria on the trumpet. And he did. So instead of the soprano singing it, the trumpeter played it. And apparently it was a big hit, and Ligeti liked that idea. And so the conductor, Elgar Howarth, wrote a piano, transcribed the orchestra part, and then now it's a little trumpet and piano piece called Mysteries of the Macabre. And so you can do it with soprano and chamber orchestra, soprano and piano, or trumpet and piano. And so I've played it in trumpet and piano form a few times. And it's a cool piece, very good, and very Ligeti, as you would expect. But at one point, the pianist has to yell at one point at the end, like you were saying, not into the piano, but just yell. But another point, you have a whistle, like a referee whistle, big loud, or police whistle, loud whistle. And I had one because at one point you have to blow it really loud at this climactic moment. And so I got it ready. I'm playing, and I got the whistle ready in my mouth, and it comes time, and okay, it's time. And so I blow as far to get this loud squeal, but I had covered the hole of the whistle, and so instead of getting this big loud squeak like this, I spat the whistle out through the piano, and it went across the stage going bum, 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 like that, with no sound. So it must have been the most bizarre thing in that concert. Instead of a huge squealing whistle, I just spat the whistle out over the piano. Anyways, that's my
the
story.
good thing about contemporary music, people never know.
Yeah, they maybe not know.
It was intended.
Why did you spit that whistle out?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. That's true.
That's amazing. Why don't you show us maybe the most crazy scores out there? Because I know that contemporary music is quite different in how they state things.
Yes, right. Well, this is, we could just, I mean, this is not super crazy, but we could just look a little bit unusual at first. Just
This is enough for my mom to get faint.
yeah, right.
This is.
So this is of George Crumb, Music for a Summer Evening, a 2 pianos and 2 percussion piece for amplified pianos and percussion. And so actually this, remember when I was strumming and holding silently? That's what these boxes represent. So these are the notes that you silently depress, and then you strum. That's depicted by the notes above. That's the strum, and then you silently go to the next one with pedal. So that's that. This also, you also have to sing along or hum along sometimes with what you're playing. That's what's happening here. And there's tubular, there's whistles and a whole bunch of other non-piano and non-percussion instruments as well. So that looks a little bit different. It's fairly traditional, but it's slightly different. This is what I used to use when I was young and had good eyesight to play the Ligeti etudes, reduced to 1/4 the size. But now I'm too old, I can't read that. You can see it's next to impossible now to read.
5 hours later.
You mentioned that one of your young students, who is 9 years old, she composed a contemporary in a contemporary style. What's the best age and approach to introduce kids to new contemporary music?
That's a good question. I think, I think the earlier the better. And in this case with this student of mine, former student of mine, I mean, the approach was to have fun with the sounds, the cool sounds. I mean, it was really all about what does this strummed sound make you think of, and what is this blocked sound or plucked sound or whatever, all these sounds. Was just to get their imaginations going and then put those sounds together in some sort of structure, some sort of dramatic form. I showed her a bunch of sounds in that case, and then she went home and she put them together into something. Mm-hmm. And I believe that mostly that stood. I mean, maybe I gave a couple of suggestions, to have a better climax or a better ending or something like that, I think. But mostly it was just that. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I think that could be, she was 9 or something, but it could be younger than that. I think it doesn't really matter. And the more that they are listening to these cool sounds and thinking about them as possible music, like sort of Cajun, right? Yeah. And then putting them together in some sort of dramatic way, thinking about the communication and the progression of this and how would an audience enjoy this, what story are they trying to tell. I think all of that is fantastic, and it's just a step to the right, or that's the left, step to the right, to say the same thing about Chopin, right, or Bach, right, to say, okay, now what's Chopin's story, and what do you think, and what sounds were he not with unusual sounds, I suppose, but with sounds nonetheless, and trying to create something. So I think you could do that with a very young little kid.
Yeah, it's just a game. We sometimes play a cluster game. And they love it because they can make sound that they look at their parents and think, "I'm really allowed."
Yeah, right. And that's a big draw. Yeah, that's a good point. There's this set of 8 volumes by George Kurtag, right, the great Hungarian composer. Jedekok, I think that's how you pronounce it, and which just means games, apparently. Huh. And he has, and it's for little kids, could be the littlest kid, and it's mostly just to familiarize them with sounds, to get them used to cool. It's for the piano, although he's done adaptations for other instruments too. Clusters and the look of them. It's not necessarily traditional notation, just a big black blob for a cluster and going up or going down and stuff. And I think that's great. Just getting them used to it and with no rules. Really, I think that's, or the rules themselves are minor little inconsequential things.
Do you understand correctly? So to approach new music, the main rule is to be open-minded.
I think so. I think that's a very important thing. I think classical music, we talk about, we have this tiny percentage of the population, of the musical population, of the classical music loving population. Only a tiny percentage of them like classical music. I don't know what it is, but let's say 5% or something like that. But that's true of music, that there's only a tiny percent of population that likes classical music from the pop music world, right? And so I think it's sort of the same. Whatever we're talking about with contemporary music, and people saying, well, it's kind of boring or weird, and I don't get it, and I'm scared of it. People are saying the same thing about classical music that are used often. So, I think just get people open to it, that not scared of it. I think it's mostly about exposure. I don't think it's about training or knowledge. I think it's just about exposure. I think that, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I often say in my little informal lectures sometimes about contemporary music that, or not just contemporary music, but in music, that, your mailman or your postal worker, I should say, in Finland has a favorite Mahler symphony, right? And whereas here, speaking just about North America, maybe they don't know Mahler, right? Not to be, discriminatory against North America or something like that. But there's cultural heritage and there's exposure, and some cultures and some countries have a, we know the Mahler symphonies, and others are like, what? Who's Mahler? I don't know. And that's sad. They should know a lot. And then we can take that further to talk about Ligeti or Kurtag or contemporary things or whatever,
So what advice would you give to new listeners of contemporary music? What they should start with, what they should...
I would say listen to lots of music, persevere, keep your mind open, don't give up, and listen to it. If you think you don't like it, okay, but listen to it 5 more times anyways. Also, maybe if you have some friends who maybe have some knowledge or have some liking for contemporary music, maybe, or to a degree, ask them what they liked and then listen to that.
Great.
Right?
May I ask you?
Yeah.
Maybe you can state your 10 favorite compositions or composers you wish us to explore.
Yeah, sure. Sure, that's fun. It's I could speak for 3 hours on my favorites, of course, but maybe I'll twist that just slightly, but it'll have a good result, I think, which will be, I can list, I think, the 10 of the pieces that spoke to me, like the 10 that I like were those pieces for me. So one of them was, and this is in no particular order, this is not the first or anything, but one of them was Schnittke, Alfred Schnittke, Concerto Grosso No. 1, which is a fantastic piece for 2 violin soloists and prepared piano, but the prepared piano is not the soloist, the 2 violinists are the soloists, and harpsichord. Amazing, sort of weird neo-Baroque kind of piece. I love that piece. So that's one. Rzewski, The People United Will Never Be Defeated, for me was a very special piece, which I eventually came to learn and record. But I think that's a great piece. People love that piece. Whenever I play that, like lay people and experts alike seem to really respond well to that piece. So that one. Another Schnittke piece, the Kyrie from his Requiem. So a choral work is beautiful. It's really a beautiful piece. And so it's not scary or anything. It's just gorgeous. So that's another piece and a choral work. Another choral piece that is scary, but I loved it, is Ligeti's Requiem. So that I often tell when I'm doing this same sort of talk to my own students, let's say, or people in general. I'll say to them, if you want a really scary piece, listen to Ligeti Requiem in your basement with the lights out, right? And it's because it's scary, but an amazing piece. Another piece that's sort of scary and kind of violent is Christopher Rouse, the late great American composer Christopher Rouse, who wrote this orchestral piece called Gorgon. And Gorgon, you may know, Gorgon were the three sisters, the mythological sisters, one of whom was Medusa, right? With the snake hair that turned people to stone. So he wrote this piece, Gorgon, and it has 3 main movements, and then 2 movements in between those 3 main movements. The 3 movements are the sisters. The last one is Medusa. And the 2 in between are supposed to represent magic spells or something. And it's a very cathartic, wild, violent, rhythmic, loud, crazy piece. But I love that piece. And it's sort of like and Rouse said that he wanted to try to create some of the visceral energy of a rock concert. It doesn't sound at all like rock music. That's not the point. But the energy and the loudness and the in-your-faceness of it, he was trying to recreate that, and he does so. And so that spoke to me too. That piece was amazing. And that's violent and ugly and craggy but amazing still. And then another Ligeti piece was the Nonsense Madrigals. So these are a cappella choir piece, little, 5-member, 6-member, I don't know, I think 5. And they're on funny little nursery rhyme-ish things, sort of Lewis Carroll kind of texts, and ingenious, cool, and quirky, and even whimsical kind of pieces. So that's another piece that spoke to me. And then Dutilleux, Henri Dutilleux, the great French composer, who I actually had a great privilege to work with. And I played all of Dutilleux's piano music and all of his chamber music with piano for Dutilleux and his wife Geneviève Joie as well in Paris back when I was young. And that was amazing. And I've always loved his music. And so his piano sonata, which I'm going to record actually in the next year, is a special piece for me. I love that piece. And one of his orchestral pieces called Metabol, Metaboles, Metabol, is an amazing piece. That's another piece that spoke to me too. There's of course countless other pieces too, including traditional pieces like the Goldberg variations or these other classics that I before I knew them, and then when I heard them for the first time they were revelations. But for contemporary, there's at least a few. Oh, one more. It's not contemporary, but it's from the 20th century. Bartók's Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celeste. That piece also is one of the ones. So that's a mixture of newer.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Like there's my list, and you could try my list. Listen to all those pieces, and maybe some of them will speak to you too. You people in the audience. Or not, but then you could get somebody else's list and then listen to those. And I wouldn't be surprised if they had such a powerful effect on me, those pieces I listed. Well, then maybe there's a good chance it might have an effect on somebody else too, perhaps.
We will hope so.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure too.
Thank you.
And now when we almost finished, I will ask you a few tricky questions.
Okay.
Do you believe that music is entertainment?